Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, what a horrific trauma for you both have to suffer. First of all, Michael, let's get your thoughts on Paula Vennells, the then Chief Executive of the Post Office, who presided over this. We don't know what her story is yet because she hasn't seen fit to tell it to us, but I'm sure she's got some kind of excuse. However, she has today kind of caved in after more than 1 million people signed a petition to strip her of her CBE. She's fallen on her sword and stripped herself of it and handed it in. Late in life, has she done the right thing?
I believe that she's done the right thing by handing the CBE back. And I also think that it would be appropriate for the two former CEOs of Post Office to hand their CBEs back as well.
And also, Michael, the police are investigating elements of all of this, and I don't know whether Paula Vennells is being investigated specifically, but I would suggest, without in any way implying that she's guilty of any crime, that she needs to be looked at by the police. Am I right?
I think you are, and I think one needs to take this a little step further, that she and others need to be investigated by the police to look for, I wouldn't say criminal activities, but activities that have broken the law, because somewhere along the line, somebody within Post Office Limited has given the green light for these prosecutions of sub-postmasters, knowing full well that there's faults with the Horizon system and the bugs in there and the problems with the hardware.
Michael, you were actually portrayed in the drama by the actor Sean Dooley, and I mean, really remarkably, you say that when you discovered that the data in branches could be altered remotely, the very next day, someone turned up in your post office and demanded that you needed to pay £44,000. Tell us about your story and what you went through.
Well, that was right. I visited Bracknell that day with a view to working with the team down there, Fujitsu and Post Office, to establish what was going wrong with the stock control of the Bureau de Change. But when you walk into an office suite, sorry?
Michael, we've lost the sound on you, so we'll try and work that out. We're going to go now to Lord Ken McDonald, who's the former Director of Public Prosecutions, who actually was the successor to, or the predecessor to Keir Starmer in that respect. Thank you for joining us, Ken.
Hello, Kevin.
I mean, a few of these prosecutions against these sub-postmasters were actually instigated under the auspices of the Crown Prosecution Service, but most of them were due to the Post Office's legal ability to mount its own prosecutions. I would suggest that in the light of what's happened here, that ability must be taken away from the Post Office.
Well, that's totally right. I mean, historically, some government departments, Post Office used to be effectively a government department, DWP and others conducted their prosecutions in-house. The problem with that is that that means that you have the supposed aggrieved party, in this case, the Post Office, prosecuting in its own cause, and that leads to a lack of objectivity, may even lead to a degree of corruption in the way that the cases are brought. And what you need is an independent prosecutor, an independent state prosecutor like the Crown Prosecution Service, who can take an independent and objective look at the evidence without having any skin in the game. And I mean, the Post Office obviously had a lot of skin in the game, and that may have affected the way these cases were brought. Certainly, they failed to disclose to defendants lots of material they had, which would have assisted the defendants or would have undermined the Post Office's case. And those are both categories of material which by law have to be disclosed by the prosecution to the defence, and weren't in this case, which is a primary reason why we've seen so many miscarriages of justice.
We're going to go back to Michael Rudkin in a little bit, Ken, but if I can ask you one more question. We now know, I mean, when it emerged that actually people at the Post Office knew that the Horizon system was full of glitches. And they didn't mention that during the prosecutions, the initial prosecutions. 39 cases of prosecutions, convictions were immediately overturned. Now, if people knew, well, people did know at the post office that there were these glitches, that there were serious problems with the Horizon computer system, and they never introduced that into court. They kept that secret from court. That's a crime, isn't it?
Well, I think the police are looking at that precise question at the moment, and undoubtedly there could be a number of offences committed there. One is fraud. Various aspects of the Fraud Act could be breached there, but also attempts to pervert the course of justice. I mean, this is very serious misconduct. If it is the case, I stress if it is the case that anyone in the post office deliberately sat on material which they knew called their own case into question or might have assisted the defence case, that is gross misconduct, serious misconduct. And I think, as you said earlier, the ITV drama brilliantly exposed the consequences of that misconduct for real, live human beings.
Let's go back now to Michael Rudkin, who is in that drama, played by Sean Dooley, the actor. And before we had to go away from you, Michael, you were talking to us about what you went through, particularly the fact that when you expressed concern or discovered that data in post office branches could, in fact, be altered remotely, the very next day, a post office auditor turns up at your shop and says that £44,000 is unaccounted for. Remind us of what you went through.
Well, from that day forth, I was immediately suspended because there was a shortage of £44,000. But ironically, 3 months after that, I was absolved of that shortage because I was an executive within the union and I wasn't present in the office. That said, my wife was my manager, who ran the post office and did so very well, apart from the shortages that would crop up, of which she would report to the helpline. And to be told, usual thing, you're the only one, but we'll tell you how to put it right. And they did, until it came to this culmination of a shortage of £44,000. One of the things that I've always been sceptical of is the use of the Proceeds of Crime Act, whereby they wait till they reach the threshold, both of the value and of the time that's involved, in order to then come after postmasters. Anybody that's a retailer will tell you, if they're 10 or 20 pounds down in the till, they're on it. They're talking to the staff about it. Is it an accident? Has something happened? But no, the post office wait until it gets into thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. Why? Yeah. Because they've looked at this as an exercise as to how to abuse the Proceeds of Crime Act, go after sub-postmasters, make them pay the money back, and take all the family assets.
Now, Michael, I gather that you and your wife have been offered what seems to be a fairly standard amount of £600,000 compensation. Now, as you have pointed out, because of this, you've been out of business for 15 years. In itself, 600 grand doesn't seem much for that. And secondly, the trauma you've been through, there's nothing worse than being convicted of a crime you didn't commit. Other families have been destroyed, marriages have been ruined, people have been driven to drug addiction and alcoholism. 4 people committed suicide, 20 people went to jail. I mean, 600 grand sounds like a lot of money, but that isn't the sort of money that people tend to get when they are the victims of such a profound misjustice. You deserve more than that, don't you?
You eloquently summarised the sequence of events there, and I want to dispel this myth that's around the offer of £600,000. The people who have had their convictions overturned, number 79 out of 700, those are the ones who have the 600,000 available to them, minus any interim payments that they've had paid. So this 600,000 isn't the glorified figure as it sounds, because it's not an insignificant amount of money. I mean, for me, £50 out of my pocket's a lot of money. Never mind £600,000 going in it.
Yeah. Should we bring Ken back? Yeah, Ken, on this business of compensation, now the government are considering they're hoping to get a bill through pretty sharpish to exonerate everyone, which of course qualifies them for compensation. Now, it's hard to think of the astronomical sum that this is going to cost the post office. I would suggest it shouldn't cost the taxpayer any money. Maybe Fujitsu should chip in their amount. But £600,000 to people, you know, one woman, poor lady, she was 8 weeks pregnant. She was locked up for 15 months on her 10-year-old son's birthday. You know, 600 grand for that. I mean, I know it sounds like a lot of money, but frankly, she deserves more. You know, the punishment has to fit the crime here.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not just that. It's the scale of the misconduct here that appears, and the fact that we're dealing with the largest mass miscarriage of justice in British modern history, perhaps in British history, full stop. And so obviously the payments that are made out have to reflect that. Can I just say a word about Fujitsu, Kevin? Because they're passing without what I think is some of the comment they deserve in this story. This company, since 2013, has had no less than £3 billion of public money in government contracts. They installed a dodgy software system, which they knew was dodgy. They then sent expert witnesses to give evidence in the High Court civil proceedings, whose evidence the judge was extremely skeptical about. And I think that the police, if they're not looking at Fujitsu, should be looking at Fujitsu very, very carefully on the same basis that they're looking at the post office, because I think it's a real possibility that if that company was investigated, some of the sort of behavior that we've seen in the post office of covering up, of dissembling, would be uncovered. It'd be nice to think, wouldn't it, that a company that's received something like £3 billion in public money, your money, my money, the sub-postmasters' money, over the last 10 years, might think about setting up some sort of fund to compensate some of the people who have been destroyed by the inadequacy of their software. But I guess we won't hold our breath for that to happen.
Yeah, no, it's quite remarkable, isn't it? They've gone on to have almost 200 government contracts. I mean, you know, you couldn't get away with that normally in the private sector, but there they are, failing and being rewarded for it.
Failing upwards, yeah.
Before you go, Ken, it's a difficult question to answer, but in brief, how on earth did this happen when there are so many people involved, when this is brought to MPs, when this is brought to the Post Office Minister, when the civil service sort of turned around and apparently said to Sir Ed Davey, nothing to see here, when this is brought to the board of the Post Office. How on earth did nobody say, no, there is definitely something very wrong here if 700 people are all being accused of having their hand in the till?
Yeah, it's a sort of institutional circling of the wagons, I think. People batten down the hatches and hope for the best. I think the fact that the Post Office was prosecuting its own case has been a central issue here. I do strongly believe, as someone who once headed the CPS, that if the CPS had been prosecuting these cases, this evidence about the inadequacies, the incompetences in the software system would have been disclosed to the defence. And in those circumstances, these cases would have been dismissed by the courts very, very quickly. So I think it's a combination of failings within the institutions, a circling of the wagons, a refusal to face up to the catastrophe. And it would have been an immense catastrophe of the Post Office because they'd invested so much money in this, coupled with system failures, the failure of having the so-called aggrieved party prosecuting its own case rather than having independent prosecutors looking at the material and coming to the right conclusions. It's a combination. It's a whole system failure.
Thanks, Ken. Last quick question to you, Michael. It must be a weird experience to see yourself portrayed in a TV drama. Were you, Sean Dooley's a great actor. Were you happy with his version of yourself?
It was actually a surreal experience. The fact that there I am watching this programme. Yeah. Sean Dooley gets out of his car and introduces himself to one of the meetings he attends and says, "I'm Michael Rudkin." And I thought, no, I'm Michael Rudkin.
Listen, Michael, all the best to you and your wife, and thank you so much for coming on, and thank you to Lord Ken McDonald.
One thing out there before we go.
Go on.
And this is if Lord Ken could shine some light on the fact that there's been a failure, a mass failure on behalf of the Post Office to disclose documents to the inquiry. And would he advocate that the powers of prosecution be removed from Post Office Limited?
Definitely, without any question at all. the power to prosecute should be removed from the Post Office and passed over to the independent state prosecutor, which is the Crown Prosecution Service. They're not up to the job, and they've proved themselves incapable of doing it fairly.